welcome to everyone. I am Dean Michelle Zacher, and I'm the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at Touro Law School. And I am joined with Nicole Osborne, who's an attorney at Ruskin Moscow. And I would love to, we're going to get started talking a lot about cybercrime and cyber issues and cybersecurity and a whole lot of fun things, fun topics. I just want to give you a little bit about Nicole's background. Nicole, not to embarrass you at all, but you've really done such wonderful work. Sometimes it's embarrassing when people say things like this about you, but you've been doing such wonderful work as an associate at Ruskin Moscow. And you are a member of the Cybersecurity and Data Privacy Practice Group. So you really do specialize in things like commercial litigation and other types of cybersecurity and data and interesting things that I happen to have students who we talk about this all the time, but you've been even teaching in some of this work, as part of your profession, and we can't wait to get into a little bit more. So thank you so much for being here with us today. We can't wait for, everyone's going to be excited to hear what you have to say.
Oh, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let me start by asking you, how did you get started in the career that you're in? Because I believe a lot of students and a lot of practicing attorneys would love a career in this field, and it's great to hear how you were able to get started.
Yeah, so I had a pretty non-traditional path into this practice area. During law school, I had worked for the federal government. I had interned for the United States Army JAG Corps, and I had a lot of government investigation experience. So when I started here, we were really starting to really beef up our cybersecurity and data privacy practice area, and they were looking for someone with that kind of background to be an associate in the practice group, and I helped to build the practice group over the last few years. So I always say, I know what I did, most people can't do, is right place and the right time sort of situation. But if people are looking to break into this practice area, there are a lot of really good things people can do. If you're lucky enough and the school you attend have classes on cybersecurity or cybercrime, like I know you teach, or anything like that, I definitely would say to take advantage of that. When I went to law school, that really didn't exist. So it's great that schools are starting to develop curriculum in this area now. But there's also certain, certifications people can get, like the SIP certification that a lot of employers look for when they're hiring for cybersecurity attorneys, and really just attending the conferences, meeting the people. It's a really growing practice area. It's not a new practice area. It has existed and evolved, for the last 20 years, but I think it's really exploded at the moment to where people are really recognizing it as a great area to work in.
I think that answer is fantastic. I think sometimes the right place at the right time is just
right.
what happens, but you're right. It's not the plan, because you can't really plan that. So just to follow up, and then we're going to get into some other topics, but just to follow up, when if you're involved in the hiring process at a firm like yours, or just is that something you would look for? Would you look for students who have taken classes in law school in this area? Would you look for students who maybe write in this area or have been involved in maybe a cyber law society at their school, anything like that?
Yeah, so I think it's really rare to find entry-level attorneys that have experience in this area. So I do think it really helps to differentiate, an individual from the big group of applicants when they do. I think anything from taking classes, if you're a student, you can write your note on a cybersecurity topic. There's lots of issues at the moment that are unaddressed, so I always feel like it's ripe for a note. If you can find somewhere where you can intern and do this type of work, that's great. But I also tell students, there's a lot of traditional practice areas that bleed into cybersecurity, right? Being a health law attorney, you're a cybersecurity attorney. HIPAA is one of the, original cybersecurity regulations that we have in, the United States. And a lot of other cybersecurity laws take a lot of, the protocols and requirements of HIPAA and incorporate it into new areas. So, there's more traditional practice areas that lend itself perfectly for a career in cybersecurity, that already exists and people could develop, experience in, and then could transition into a more pure cybersecurity role.
That's fantastic. And it's just funny. It happens to be that at Touro, we have so many students interested in health law and interested in cyber law, and some interested in completely other things. But it's so great that you point out the overlap with that. That's Fantastic. So thank you. And it's just good for us to know as we get started. But I guess one of the first things I want to ask you, just to hear a little bit about your daily life, is what is it like in the life of being a cybersecurity lawyer? Like what kinds of tasks do you see day to day? What do you work on? Anything you'd like to share to start us off?
Yeah, so my practice area really divides itself into two distinct areas. One is the data breach incident response work that I do, and I think that's what people really think of when they think about cybersecurity attorneys. I get the call that a client's been breached. I hire a forensic team, I investigate the breach, I do the reporting to the individuals in the government. And then my other practice area is more compliance-based work. So, assisting people in being compliant with the New York State Shield Act, which is New York's prospective cybersecurity law applying generally to most businesses. And I also help businesses with all the growing area of data privacy between, California's Consumer Privacy Act and then now the litany of other states that have produced their own. So what my day looks like really does depend on what I'm working on. So, I never know when a breach call is going to come in. So it's a very unpredictable practice area. I went one year where I couldn't attend a wedding without getting a call about a client being breached and having to manage it and then also manage, personal obligations. So understand that it's not one of those types of practice areas where you can like set your watch and like know what's going to happen and what you're going to do on the day to day, because, threat actors don't give us a heads up when they're, going to breach a client or let us know that they've breached a client more often than not, right? So I'd say that it really depends. On a day I get a call that someone's been breached, I'm on the phone all day. I may be talking to their insurance carrier. I'm hiring a forensic team. There's a lot of contracting that goes into it. It's a really interdisciplinary practice area. So you have to understand all the cybersecurity rules and regulations, but you also have to understand, or at least have a team of people who understand contract provisions, right? So if you're contracting with a forensic team, making sure that liabilities are properly assessed between your client and this company, understanding like fee structures, making sure you're ensuring attorney-client privilege throughout. So there's a lot of different things that you have to do almost immediately when somebody gets breached. So it can go from anything from reviewing a vendor due diligence form if I'm doing compliance work, drafting written information security policies and programs, all the way to like having to go to a client's office somewhere because they've been breached and like they need somebody on site to help them. So it's very unpredictable, my day to day.
I hear that, but it's also probably never boring. And I think there are a lot of future attorneys out there, current attorneys out there who are looking for an exciting type of career. I mean, right? No one wants to be disrupted in their personal lives at weddings or at anything else, but at least the day-to-day is exciting and interesting. It sounds great. I want to take you to the data breach. So let's just say you get the call. Hopefully you're not at a wedding. Hopefully it's just a typical Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. and you get the call. And unfortunately, because we do see a lot of data breaches, just like you said, and unfortunately, I know we never want them to come in, but let's say you get the call that something's been breached. You kind of told us just a little bit. Can you describe a little more, maybe a little bit more detail, what that's like getting, speaking to the insurance company, maybe hiring a forensics team? What is a forensics team? Anything like that? Those are some really interesting details we'd love to hear.
Yeah, so you typically get a call. It can come from a bunch of different places. It can come from, a potential new client themselves, the CEO, the CFO of that company. It can come from, another attorney that may represent them on general business matters, but they don't handle cybersecurity matters. It can be referred directly by an insurance company if you're on their panel. So the clients come from a lot of different sources. But once you find them, you have to start assessing like what occurred. There's a way you have to make sure you understand, what sort of incident. If it's a ransomware incident, sometimes they'll be able to tell you that because there's a note that says, we've locked down your systems and we're demanding a certain amount of money. And sometimes you won't know that until much, much later. But typically cybersecurity insurance is very common now. It's much more common now than it was even 5 years ago. It's important to note though, that there's no like standardization of cybersecurity insurance. So it's not like car insurance, and like whether you go to, one car insurance company or another, you're generally getting like the same type of policy because there's rules in place on what they have to cover or don't cover. That doesn't exist in cybersecurity. So every single policy is a little different, and what each company will provide is different. So some cybersecurity insurance companies, you can only represent an individual if you're on their panel, or if they issue a reservation of rights letter, like in New York, that's an insurance rule. And some people will allow you to represent them whether or not you're on their panel. So you're interfacing with insurance, trying to either let them know I'm on your panel, it's okay, or proving that you're qualified enough to handle this matter if you're not on their panel. Typically, it moves very quickly because breaches have to be addressed very quickly. So from there, if you're approved or you're already on their panel, you'll get a list of the forensic companies that they work with. You'll work with your client to choose a company. And from there, you'll call them, see if they're like a good fit for this particular type of matter. You'll contract that with them to put them in place. You always want to make sure that when you're contracting with a forensic team, that you're like shrouding them in your attorney-client privilege. It's, under the principles of US v. Covell. There's a really interesting case law surrounding forensic reports and attorney-client privilege. It started with this very wide belief that these sort of forensic reports could be privileged, and to be kept from discovery. And slowly but surely, as most like principles I think we see, that right has sort of been eroded away. And now there's very particular things you need to do to ensure that any sort of forensic report can be privileged. So you want to make sure you're contracting with them appropriately. And then you're trying to do that quickly because, many times companies aren't able to operate. And while a company can't operate, they're not making money. And when a company's not making money, the owners of that company are not happy, right? They have a lot of things that they need to address. So you're trying to move quickly to get, a forensic company in place so that they can begin to investigate the breach, figure out the origin date of the breach, so that you can figure out when people can get their backups by, if they have backups that are available to use. So you're not bringing them back up into an environment that the threat actor is already in, right? With the same backdoors and vulnerabilities. You want to go to a safer period in time to back them up by. And then from there, they're doing the forensic work. They're either, they're imaging the systems, they're trying to figure out how the viruses or malware may have worked, what the threat actors looked at, what the logs are telling them. They're really doing the technical work, and the attorneys are doing, the legal work. So I'm assessing where the client base of the company is, because for purposes of data breach response and notifications, it doesn't matter where the company is located. It matters where the individuals that are affected are located. So you can have a breach where 500 people are affected, and you could be following the law of 50 different states, depending on where they are. So
that's not easy, right?
No, it's not. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. I think we're going to have this state-run cybersecurity response protocols for a while. And it, generally the principles are the same, but the requirements are very different. So whether or not you have to offer somebody credit monitoring in a state, that changes state by state. What the notice even has to say can change state by state. So you're really looking to take the various different laws and ensure that like whatever notification procedures you're put into place, that they comply with the various different laws that can be in effect. And then you also, so not only do you have to notify the individuals based on where they live, you may have to notify the Attorney General's office of that state or a different regulator in that state, depending on the rules of that particular state. And then you might also have to notify the credit bureaus. So certain states require you to notify, the 3 major credit bureaus of a breach, depending on the number of individuals affected. So there's a lot of different legal nuance that goes into play that you have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis for every breach. You can't say, oh, well, we handled, this past breach one way, we'll handle this one the same. It doesn't really work like that. And then you also could possibly have federal rules sitting on top of all those state rules that you might have to follow depending on what the business does.
Wow. Okay. So
A
that's
lot.
absolutely right. There is so much to know. I'm sure you're constantly like checking either with people or reading the rules again over and over again to make sure that you're complying. But that is a big responsibility considering how many different, I guess, forks in the road there could be
Right.
for you. And so, but that's fantastic. If you know, which are the forensic specialists typically a bunch of just computer geniuses? Like, do they have computer degree? Like, how did they get into that field? I'm just curious, because they probably don't have any legal background, right? So it's just working with them to figure out. You help them with the law, and they help you with the
Right.
technical stuff, right?
Yeah, they have technical backgrounds. You know, there's degrees they can get now specifically in cybersecurity,
Yeah.
in forensic investigations that exist. You know, I run against, though, forensic investigators that do have their JDs pretty frequently.
Wow.
That they either did IT and forensic work first and then went to law school, or went to law school and then decided to go into IT or forensic. So it happens probably more often than not that someone on the team on their end also has a JD, but it's not
Love that.
required. I think
It's
it's
not
just,
required. That's a great combination, I
yeah.
guess. That's fantastic to know. So, back to like the insurance. So when you're working, is it fair to say, well, I guess I should just ask you, what is a typical max amount that you see insurance companies willing to pay out for things like ransomware? Because I'm sure some of these, wrongdoers would love to ask for, a gazillion dollars,
Right.
and the business owner thinks it's worth a gazillion dollars to pay it. But they may not have that kind of money. So how does that get sorted out? And are they aware of, are the wrongdoers, I guess I call them that, the breachers, are they aware of the max amount in the insurance companies?
So I haven't come across a typical number that insurance is willing
Okay.
to pay. It really depends on what the threshold amount the client has. So if somebody has a $5 million policy, typically they may be willing to agree with their insurance carrier to spend a higher level of that reserve on ransomware, ransom for ransomware, compared to maybe a client that only has a $1 million policy. There's a lot of different assessments that are made when it comes into whether or not to pay a ransom. And when it comes to the threat actors and what they may know, there's really a high level of sophistication that we see now with a lot of threat actors. Basically, if we're talking about like ransomware, ransomware is not the point of the what the threat actors are doing. The ransomware is the last piece of malware that is deployed in a long series of like actions taken by the threat actors.
Yeah, explain that, because that's
Yeah. So the threat
unbelievable.
actors typically will get in, whether it be by a phishing email, which is probably the most common, meaning that they send an email to someone at a company saying, we're changing how we're, are doing our invoices, please click here to see our new website, or please download this PDF, or click here, those types of things we've all been trained to be used to. And when you do that, it's really downloading a piece of malware that would allow the threat actors to gain access to your systems. Either that's most common. You still have things like brute force attacks where, threat actors try over and over to guess a password to be able to get into someone's systems. There's a lot of different ways they may gain access. Once they have access, they're looking around, right? They're in there looking for information that may be valuable to them. So whether that be who your clients are and what your invoices look like, so that they later can do some sort of wire transfer fraud scheme, sending emails to your clients saying, hi, we've had a change in wiring instructions, please, pay your invoices to this account instead of the account you've typically been sending it to. They might be looking to steal HR information to, later deploy some sort of unemployment benefit scheme like we all saw during COVID when everybody, had unemployment be filed in their names. And I'm not saying that's because your company was breached, but that's because they got your information from somewhere else that allowed them to do it.
Right.
They may be looking just for information that they can take and then later sell for a profit on the dark web, which would be, anything that's considered personally identifiable information, things like social security numbers, driver's license numbers, credit card numbers, account information. So they're in there gathering a lot of information.
Right.
Typically,
So all of that alone would
Right.
be a hefty windfall for them, right?
Right.
And then they could, in theory, just get out. No one would have ever known. However, they're thinking we could really cash in by getting an extra ransomware, 1 million, $5 million payout right away, right?
Right. So they take all that information, and then it's called like double extortion now. So not only do they extort you to get you to pay a fee to regain access to your systems, now they're also saying, oh, and if you don't pay us, we're going to leak all this information onto the dark web. So it gives like an incentive for companies who may have good backups, who could restore systems on their own. It then gives them an incentive to still pay the threat actors to try to attempt to keep the information they stole from being available on some on nefarious platforms on the dark web.
Any information on whether that they abide by their own rules in terms of you pay them? Are they still going to say it's so tempting, we can make so much money if we put this on the dark web, we have all this personal identifying information? I know we said we wouldn't if you paid, but do we trust them? What's your experience been?
So certain threat actor groups have better reputations than others when it comes to whether or not they'll disseminate information about payment. So that's why it's really important to work with people who may have experience or have contacts at certain agencies they could discuss these certain threat actors with. But there's no guarantee. At the end of the day, you're dealing with people who are willing to, exploit vulnerabilities and attack companies. There's no guarantee, even among the more quote unquote, highly rated threat actor groups, that they won't disseminate your information. But it's a cost benefit analysis that companies have to consider.
I get it. And I guess, I don't know, I would think if they have the insurance anyway, and the insurance is there for that reason and willing to pay out whatever the sum is, maybe they feel like we better, at least it's giving it our best shot to try to protect our customers' information and that kind of.
Each business feels different,
Okay.
Obviously the FBI still asks people not to pay the ransom because they'll continue to, allow these types of activities to continue. But there's no specific law against it so long as you follow certain protocols when you make the payment. But some companies say, you know what, I'm not making this payment. I don't want to support this kind of activity. And I think if I make the payment, it'll make me more vulnerable to future attacks because they know I'm the type of company that pays a ransom.
I could see that. See that. Right. It's just scary to think, well, what if I lose access to my information forever? But I guess.
And that's the other side of it.
Yeah.
Some people, either they don't have good backups, so they don't know what they're going to do if they don't pay the ransom, or they are very concerned about maybe their consumer base information and they want to try to do everything they can to perhaps keep it from being disseminated. But paying the ransom or not paying the ransom does not change any sort of analysis of whether or not you have to notify individuals, right? You can't can't say, oh, well, they said they wouldn't share it with anyone, right? So their access is enough, their exfiltration is enough. So it doesn't really change the notification process. So it really is a business decision that they have to come to on whether or not they'll make the payments.
It's a tough one. I'm sure it is no easy task. As the attorney, have you had experience seeing any of these people get caught? And if so, what happens?
So I have not worked on a case where the individuals who perpetrated these attacks were caught and money was returned to my client. So it does happen. The Colonial Pipeline breach, for example, is a very good example of that. They were able to return some of the funds, but I always use that as an example to clients, and I say that is really the exception. That's not the norm. Almost every breach I work is reported to the FBI through their IC3 form. And the FBI has contacted me in the past to discuss a breach or that they're investigating a certain breach. They want more information. So, there usually is a report to the FBI regarding a breach. They've actually updated the IC3 in recent time. And it's not only one IC3 for everything. They have a specific ransomware one now. But I don't ever want people to think like if you cooperate with the police, either police or the FBI, you're gonna see a return of your funds. It really is a rare exception.
That's so sad. That's so upsetting. But right, you hope, you still hope. Oh well, I figured as much.
There's always there's always a chance. It's a slim chance, but there's always a chance. But companies have to make these payments knowing that they're more likely than not never going to see the money returned to them.
Never see the money, but how about just punishing the individuals who like criminally having them punished might bring some sense of reward to them, even if it's not a financial reward. But
yeah, there's been some few cases of things like that have happened where certain ransomware groups have been broken up. Some people have been, arrested in the countries that they are located in, but it is very, very rare.
It's rare also. Yeah, it's, oh, wow. It's that's a crazy world, and that's a crazy world we live in. This is crazy what's going on. But yeah, I mean, this is, sadly, that's the nature of it. Of course, people who have been the victims of these breaches do want their companies, I'm sure, to continue to go on and to continue to, make the money it was making and not have too much of a lapse. So I'm sure they are, weighing all of these different scenarios as they're trying to make decisions with their lawyers like you. It's a tough one. It's a tough one. Talking about, let me ask you just about this. When you were talking about insurance companies and how it's not like car insurance companies because there's not the same level of regulation, do you think there should be in the near future a movement to try to regulate this type of insurance the way auto insurance is regulated?
I think probably eventually it'll be a more regulated area of insurance. But I just think for now, it's really important for companies when they're like purchasing cybersecurity insurance to work with a broker who's very experienced in cybersecurity insurance, to have attorneys review the insurance policies, to know what do they actually need to do to have coverage, and then to be very detailed when they go over any sort of application. I've worked on breaches where a client thought they were going to have a certain $1 million worth of coverage, and it turns out there was an inaccuracy on their cybersecurity insurance application. Now, if they had answered that question honestly, which I just think they didn't know, I don't think it was purposeful. I think they truly thought they had something in place and they didn't. It might have just been more expensive, but they would have had coverage. But because of that inaccuracy, they would have been declined coverage if they tried to move forward with it. So it's really, you don't want to be making premium payments thinking you'll be prepared the day, God forbid, something happens, and then it turns out you have no coverage. So it's really being methodical and purposeful in your acquisition of cybersecurity insurance can save people with a lot of pain.
I'm sure that's true. Now, to the extent, and again, this isn't so much a legal question, but such an interesting question that I wonder if just through your experience, what are the negotiations like when the forensic specialists are trying to get in touch with, I guess, the cyber attackers and trying to negotiate? What could be going on there? Do you ever have any, I mean, nothing that's, protected, but
no. Yeah, no,
like
it's a really interesting process. So sometimes your forensic analysts will do it, and sometimes you hire a special company that all they do is negotiate, ransom for ransomware. There's special companies that exist for that now. But I always find it to be really interesting. You have certain groups are very sophisticated, and when they're going in and they're in your system before they deploy the ransomware, they're looking for things like your financials or things on your insurance, so that when the forensic company may be negotiating with threat actors, and they may say, we can't afford X amount of money, we can only afford Y. The threat actor sometimes will send back the company's financial statements previous year, and they'll be like, really? Because we really think you can afford X.
we see it right here.
Why you can only pay Y. Here's the proof. So it can be really interesting, the negotiations. I always joke that threat actors have phenomenal customer service. When you reach out to them through either like email or a chat like box that they have, they'll get back to you. They'll respond to you fairly quickly. You're not dealing with someone you can't get a hold of and you're scared that they're going to disseminate your information, though they will respond. What's common now is they'll have countdown timers. So they'll have a website that's like publicly available, basically, if you know how to access it. And it'll say who the company is that they've breached, in the countdown, and for them to make a payment to them before they, disseminate the information they've taken.
Wow. So that's scary. And I guess it's just, but yeah, I'm sure it's a very interesting negotiation, like any kind of negotiation like this. But right. I'm not surprised to hear that the customer service is excellent, because it's in their best interest to get the money, to make it as clear as possible how they want their money. And that's their bonus on top of all the other stuff they've already gotten.
Right.
So unbelievable. Well, I also I wonder if, through all of this, you must have some tips for either small business owners or whatever it may be, who run a website, I'm sure, from law firms to doctors' offices to just, entrepreneurs who are out there with a website. What do you recommend people do, even the people who say, well, it's really just me and 3 other people who work here? What is it that people should do to really protect themselves?
Yeah, I understand that sometimes people have this idea that, oh, I'm a small business, why would anyone want to come after me? You're exactly who they want to come after, right? The JP Morgan Chases of the world are going to have all those types of protections that they could think of to try to protect their data, and they're a difficult target to hit. Whereas small to medium-sized businesses can be a much easier target because they don't have the same level of protections that a very large business would. So I would say that it's really important to, assess what you're doing. Do you have policies and procedures regarding cybersecurity? Are you using things like multi-factor authentication, which is this idea, I think we've all kind of gotten used to it now, this idea that like a code or another app you have to log into to authenticate you are yourself. When you're trying to log into your systems, that's really important, because a lot of times the threat actors can't get that other code, and then they're stopped, right? Their access is stopped. And that's why a lot of insurance companies look for it. It's why a lot of the attorney generals ask if a company had it in place when they've been breached. So I think looking into certain sort of protocols like that can be very helpful, but just making it on top of mind. It's very easy to think it won't be me. But in New York, if you're a New York business, you have an obligation to be compliant with the SHIELD Act. If you're an attorney, you have ethical obligations. The rules of professional conduct have been modified to include very specific rules that attorneys should follow. The ABA has put out certain ethics opinions regarding either prospective or retrospective actions attorneys have to take in light of a breach or preventing a breach. And that, for an attorney, it's even higher, right? So you have a duty of confidentiality to your clients, and if you've been breached, there's a chance you violated that duty. And on top of like the notifications, potential attorney general inquiries and fines and penalties that can come from there, you also have the possibility of a grievance procedure to be brought against you, right? For your violations of your ethical rules to your clients. So it's especially, it's important for every single business, but it's important that attorneys understand that there's a multi-layer regulatory and ethical response that has to be taken to ensure that, you're compliant with the law when it comes to cybersecurity.
That makes perfect sense. Would you mind just giving us like the briefest of brief, like just the New York SHIELD Act, like just a little bit, like what are the basics that maybe we would want to know about that?
Okay, yeah. So 899 B of the general business law is what I call like the prospective cybersecurity law. That's like a whole new section of the general business law that was created by the SHIELD Act. 899 A is our data breach notification law. That was modified by the SHIELD Act to include additional types of protected information and to make some other modifications to how data breaches need to be notified. But when people talk about the SHIELD Act, they're mainly thinking about the prospective law, B. So what that did is it required all businesses to have technical, physical, and administrative safeguards in place. Things like, assessing your cybersecurity program on a yearly basis, having a written information security policy in place, having things like incident response plans be in place, so that the company actually has policies and procedures on how its cybersecurity is managed or how you manage a data breach, hiring and appointing someone to be in charge of your cybersecurity program, you know, physical security, making sure things are locked, doing vendor due diligence. So there's a lot of things businesses can do that would really help to protect themselves. And now that the Shield Act mandates.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's really useful. And also, I know you were talking about just before, I don't mean to skip around, but you were just talking about how important it is for attorneys and all business owners to stay on top of this and be compliant and make sure that we're following all the rules. How much, I guess it's like a two-part question, like how much does that involve education of the employees? Like in terms of like, I know we've always seen like avoid spam, avoid phishing, like that kind of stuff. Now we have a lot of, I guess, deep fakes that come in that are, it's just getting more and more real looking. It's not quite as, spammy or phishing looking as it used to be. And so I guess what role does education of the employees play in that?
So educating your employees is one of the most important things you can do. And that's actually a requirement under the Shield Act, is to train your workforce. Mainly because you can put wonderful like technical safeguards in place, antivirus monitoring, but a company's greatest weakness ends up being their employees, not because they want to be, just because of human nature, right? So people, they get nervous. They get an email from their boss telling them to do something. They don't want to upset their boss. So they'll click a link, download something, give a password when they're not supposed to. So I think we really sometimes have to take a step back with technology and understand that like picking up the phone and having a phone call is still like one of the greatest like pieces of protection we can have when it comes to cybersecurity. So, if you get an email from a vendor you use saying that there's a change of wiring instructions, pick up the phone and call them and call the number you usually use. Don't use the number that's on the email.
Right. Great advice.
That change of wire. Because bringing back to cybersecurity insurance, most cybersecurity insurance policies for wire transfer fraud, they require you to have picked up the phone and called somebody, which I think is a little silly, because if somebody did that, the wire transfer fraud probably wouldn't have happened, right? Because someone would have said, no, we did not change our wiring instructions.
Right.
And you wouldn't have done it. But that's a common exclusion I see, that there's this type of requirement that you pick up the phone. If your boss calls you and tells you to do something they typically would never ask you to do, whether that be send information a certain way, give a password, pick up the phone and call your boss. For as much as you may be worried that your boss is going to be upset that you like bothered them when they, say, or they're in a very important meeting, they can't talk, because the emails always say that. Pick up the phone and confirm. Like, don't do it.
Exactly.
They're going to be a lot more upset when there's a data breach they're dealing with than the 3 seconds, they had to speak with you.
That's a great point.
So,
sorry.
Yeah.
No, it's great. I can't tell you, Nicole, how interesting this has been, just talking with you and hearing about your life and your role and your career. It's been fantastic. I really just want to thank you for taking the time to spend with Touro Law School and to educate us and to engage in this conversation. If there's anything else that you think you'd like to leave us with, knowing anything about cybersecurity, please feel free. If there's anything that I didn't ask you that you were hoping maybe I might.
Right. I would just say that this is a really evolving area of law. So if it's a year from now and you're listening to this podcast, there might be 100 different things you should be doing that I would never think of now that becomes the norm in a year from now. But, it's really important to stay on top of a business's cybersecurity obligations, work with companies that are really, educated in this area, because there's huge fines and penalties that are associated with the lack of compliance, or that are, because we didn't even really talk about today that, including attorney generals, right, fines, penalties, class actions are very prominent following a data breach. So, there's liability coming out of business from a lot of different angles. So it's much better, although I understand it can seem expensive and seem difficult, it's much better to address cybersecurity before something happens than after it happens.
Definitely. And staying compliant with all the rules that you told us about. I mean, yeah, it's preventing it is the best you can do. And then hopefully they won't need you to help. Hopefully there won't be a breach, but right when there is, I guess the next most important thing is contacting an attorney you can trust, who can get you help and get you help with a forensic team and all the other parts that need to be. An experienced attorney who understands this, what's going on, would really be the best place to put your trust and hopefully like get the best resolution. So
Right, you know, it's almost impossible to say you can 100% prevent a breach, because you can't. But
right.
if you have a really good, you know, compliance program, and you're trying and you have things in place to try to prevent these things, you're going to be in a much better position than a company that does not on the back end.
That's right. That's great. I think we should probably leave it at that, because I think that's the perfect place. But again, I thank you so much for spending the time with us and for just giving us some insight into your day-to-day activities as a cybersecurity, cyber everything lawyer. And thank you. Just thank you again. And it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you. It's been great.